Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing you another really awesome guest today involved in creating a better and safer tomorrow for all of us. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. David Boucher, Director of Infectious Disease Preparedness and Response for the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response, also known as ASPR, at the United States Department of Health and Human Services. ASPR is the organization that's involved in leading our nation's medical and public health preparedness for response to and recovery from various disasters and other public health emergencies. And they collaborate with hospitals, healthcare coalitions, various biotech firms, community members at the state, local, tribal, and territorial level, and other partners across the country, ultimately to really improve our readiness and response capabilities to a variety of threats. Dr. Boucher previously held several other really critical roles within the organization, including as chief of the Antivirals and Antitoxins branch at BARDA's Office for Anthrax, Botulinum, Ebola and Smallpox therapeutics. He was acting director for ASPR's Office of Industrial-Based Management and Supply Chain, serving as, and he also served as the HHS lead negotiator for various product development and procurement agreements during COVID-19 and medical countermeasures initiatives. Dr. Boucher has his undergraduate in genetics, did his Ph.D. in biochemistry and molecular biology from University of California, Davis, and we're honored to have him with us. A lot of really important stuff to get into today. Dr. David Boucher, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Ira, thank you. It's really great to be here. Really excited for the conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely. But before we get into all things preparedness and infectious disease related, would love to hand things over to you for a little bit, just to further introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your background. And as we were chatting offline a bit, I noted that before you got involved in all this stuff and dealing with the nastiest infectious diseases out there, you were actually, a lot of your early work focused on prostate cancer and some really interesting imaging science and technologies. Take us back a bit on how this journey all got started for you, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Sacramento. UC Davis was that college that we all kind of wanted to get into if we didn't want to go far from home. I initially started in anthropology, transferred over to Davis, was wrapping up my last laboratory class. I think it was a genetics class or maybe chem. And just kind of felt I didn't really want to step away from the lab. So I switched over, got into the genetics program, loved that to death, got connected with a cancer biologist, took a grad course when I was still an undergrad. He connected me to somebody doing some interesting work on hormone therapy. There's a lot of cancers that are really dependent upon steroids for progression. The one I started working with was prostate cancer, where androgen blockade therapy is kind of that first line of defense. Cancer, as it does, finds a way around. And we were trying to understand that transition from a hormone dependent state where you can block androgen and get tumor shrinkage and have some positive impact. But then, how does the cancer circumvent that? Really trying to understand that. That, for me, moved into breast cancer, doing a lot of similar type of work, but understanding a lot of the progression from DCIS to full-blown breast cancer, how we can improve the therapeutics to slow that, block it, hopefully. And then also in doing that, kind of got into probe development and understanding how we can identify DCIS, diagnose it sooner, so that we're starting interventions faster, giving ourselves a little bit better chance of success. That got me into a lot of different things, rad nuke type stuff, rad chem type things, and then nuclear optical imaging. So just did a ton of different things at UC Davis, just had a wonderful experience. I did my undergrad, postdoc, and then I was a staff scientist for 2-3 years. And just, I think I was in almost every lab possible at UC Davis and just got a really nice breadth of education, and got exposed to a lot of different fields. Just was a really great time.
Awesome. Yeah, and then you're following that, you move, sort of fast and furious into all things infectious disease and preparedness related. And I'd love to touch on some of what you've been involved in, and then we'll get into ASPR a little later on. But I thought each of these steps that sort of along the way you've taken has been a very unique experience, and they have sort of the core stories, and then a lot of sort of maybe what the public might not understand what goes on in developing some of these really novel interventions against these nasty things. But I thought an interesting place to start off with some of your work on anthrax antitoxins. And here, you're not just involved in the development and, working on the development of these interesting biologics for pre and post exposure of this nasty toxin. But at the same time, this is one of those things that falls into this area that maybe not a lot of people aren't aware of, but FDA has this sort of animal rule that when we're dealing with nasty toxins or nerve agents or, God forbid, nuclear type events, there are certain drugs we can't, spend years to develop in humans, that we have to have creative ways of getting them out there and produced. And the animal rule is one interesting thing that the FDA has going on that front. Talk a little bit about your experiences here and a little bit of what this entailed, because I think it's a very interesting sort of story in its own right.
Yeah, definitely. So I was fortunate enough to come in to BARDA in 2015, and the anthrax programs in particular were fairly mature at that point. But as you mentioned, they were following the animal rule pathway to licensure. And fortunately, the world does not give us a lot of anthrax patients to do clinical trials. So you're exactly right. We go through animal rule. And what happens in that, you do a lot of you can still do phase 1 studies in humans to take a look at dosing, take a look at safety. But when you're looking at efficacy, obviously we're not challenging humans with anthrax infection or exposure. So we have animal models serve as basically surrogates to determine efficacy. If we can prove efficacy, demonstrate efficacy in an animal model, potentially 2, that can predict human response to the particular intervention that we're looking at. In my case, it was monoclonal antibodies targeting the PA component of anthrax. We would be able to work with FDA. It takes a lot of work because the pathway, there's the general framework, but going through and saying, okay, what are the pieces of data we absolutely need? When we look at those data, we take a look and say, okay, I think it's right, but boy, it would be nice if we had this other thing too. We go back and do that. So it's really a nice collaborative experience that we got to go through with our industry partners who were really driving the ship. And our FDA colleagues that were obviously tasked with regulatory oversight and that final decision on whether to approve or not. And then at BARDA, we just kind of keep all of those things together. And that's one of the nice things too about BARDA. It is sometimes envisioned as a bag of money that's dropped off for a pharmaceutical company. They go and do great things, and then they come back with a licensed product after a while. It's really not the thing. It is the funding that we provide, but it's the technical expertise. It's a matrix organization. So as we go through things like animal rule, we have regulatory subject matter experts manufacturing subject matter experts, or SMEs, to make it a little bit shorter, clinical, preclinical. And then as we all go through as a team on the BARDA side, we get familiar with what's needed, how the FDA might look at this, that, or the other piece of data. We're then able to work with a lot of the companies that have these interventions. And some of them, they don't have products that have been approved. This is their first time through. We're able to kind of be the shepherds to help that through and make sure everybody's kind of staying on point, moving towards this common objective of getting things licensed, available to use, and when there's not a commercial market, into the stockpile so that we have them if we need them.
Excellent. As I was mentioning, I was reading your bio, the name of the branch was Anthrax, Botulinum, Ebola, and Smallpox. And I was joking with you last week when we were chatting. I would talk to Rosalind Lewis at WHO, who head up their smallpox office, and I was joking about, well, what goes on in a smallpox office, and unfortunately, there are other pox viruses on this planet, and the same with Ebola. Unfortunately, that is not the only sort of biosafety 4 level nasty hemorrhagic fever that we have to deal with. You spent a little time working in this Marburg virus vaccine consortium. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about that, because clearly, whether it's Marburg or Hanta or whatever falls into that class, we don't like those. We don't like those diseases. They're pretty nasty when they happen. Yet we have to be thinking about more than just Ebola. Talk a little bit what's involved in something like this when you have to deal not just with the BSL-4 nasty, as Marburg is, but in, again, something that may not pop its head up as much as some of these other things, but nonetheless, we have to be prepared for it.
That's a great one. And it kind of flows from the last one too, where we're able to take, those lessons learned through going through animal rule, apply them to the next countermeasure that we develop. This is kind of the same type of thing. I was originally brought in to the government to work on Ebola. I came in, it was early 2015, so not quite at the height of the situation in Western Africa, but still going on. And we were just getting into large investments into advanced research and development. And that's where we live, kind of at that phase 1 and later, what used to be called the Valley of Death. And what we saw with Ebola, there were a lot of promising products on the horizon. They were stalled, though, because that funding required to push them across to licensure just wasn't there. With that urgency that was presented to us in Western Africa, we got involved. We were able to take Ebola therapeutics, Ebola vaccines, work again with our industry partners that did a lot of the early good work. Our transition partners here in federal government, Department of Defense, they have JPEO, DITRA. Here in HHS, we work a lot with NIH, NIAID. We're the benefactors of that great early groundbreaking work that transitions to us so that we can advance things over the finish line. We did that again with, 2 Ebola therapeutics. The first one was Regeneron's Imazeb, and then Ridgeback's MAB 134. That one eventually was called Ibunga. And then, of course, with Merck's Ervebo vaccine. With those successes behind us, we then said, okay, it was Ebola Zaire in Western Africa, and it's frequently Ebola Zaire in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You see Ebola Zaire popping up. Less frequently, but still concerning, is that you see other viral hemorrhagic fevers, filoviruses, Marburg virus, Sudan virus popping up. And where we got to the place where we were a little bit more comfortable with the vaccines and therapeutics we had for Ebola Zaire, that gap was still there for Marburg and Sudan. So exactly what happened in West Africa, where something takes hold, takes off, and we don't have appropriate medical countermeasures, we were vulnerable for if Marburg and Sudan had popped up similarly. So we worked international consortium, that MARVAC consortium. That's kind of an international version of something we have here in the federal government, particularly in HHS, an Ebola working group that we called it, that broadened out. And we're saying, okay, everything that we did for Ebola Zaire, how do we do that for Marburg and Sudan? It's not a guarantee that the same backbone of a vaccine that works for Zaire is going to work for Sudan and Marburg. It's not a guarantee that the same strategy of monoclonal antibodies are going to work for Sudan and Marburg, but it's it's a nice predictor. Ebola Zaire is very similar, right? So how do we harness all of that and then advance against Sudan and Marburg? And that's really the great thing about the MARVAC consortium. It is just a collection of the best scientists from around the world. We jump in, we talk about these things. Hey, where are the gaps? Where are the interventions? Who's doing what? And then trying to coordinate a lot of the great work that's happening around all of those.
Mhm. One of the things that stands out when you look at this paper in PubMed is, as you were saying, I mean, I mean, there's so many great minds on this, and in addition to all of our agencies and partners from around the world, you have some pharmaceutical companies in here, and I thought this would be an interesting time to talk a little bit about your experiences during COVID. On a previous show, I mentioned we profiled Colonel Vic Suarez with during the pandemic was involved in the Moderna connections and sort of the Operation Warp Speed angle there. I know you've been involved in several of the working with several of the large pharmaceutical companies. Would love to just hear a little bit about your experiences on that front during the pandemic. And it seems like a lot of the big pharma companies, when I think about it, they all have these interesting sort of global health, public health divisions now that are a lot more, let's say, concerned with these issues than like a few years ago. What's been your experience there? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so nobody wanted to go through COVID. I can tell you, one of the great things that happened during it, however, is that partnership that we had with industry, pharmaceutical companies. That is kind of the bread and butter of what we do at BARDA. When I was with BARDA, is we partner with these companies, provide some of the funding that isn't available. There's not a big commercial reward for a lot of these things. There's not a commercial market. They are products that we hope we never use. We had smallpox countermeasures for quite a while that went unused all the time, thankfully. So Mpox changed that, but we might get to that a little bit later. But it is working with the different pharmaceutical companies, getting to know them. Pre-COVID, there were some that just they weren't interested in working with government. It can be challenging to learn how to work with government. All of these things. Early in COVID, we saw a loosening of that, a more willing group in big pharma to come and work with us. We reached out to companies that we had already been working with. I mentioned Regeneron and the Ebola therapeutic. They were one of the first to have a therapeutic specifically developed against SARS-CoV-2 COVID for disease caused by that virus. Moderna, we had been interested in mRNA for quite a while. The promise of that, the flexibility in that system. We had done a little bit with Moderna on Zika. We had obviously been working a lot with NIAID on some of the early work on that platform, specifically with Moderna. Broaden that out even beyond the companies we worked with, wanted to work with different companies, put out the solicitation for development of COVID vaccines. And obviously we had a lot of proposals come in, a lot of offers, and we got to choose from a lot of different companies that had a lot of great ideas. And it really was a different thing at that point where companies that would have previously said, nah, I don't really want to work with the government. They came to the table and we figured out a way to make it work. Every one of them was a little bit different. Every one of them had a little bit, the sensitivities were a little bit different, but it was a spirit of teamwork and an attitude of yes. So that when we found a problem, it wasn't, oh, I guess this isn't going to work. It's okay. This doesn't work as is. How can we get to yes? How can we get to something that works both for the government, for the pharmaceutical company, and ultimately has that benefit to the American people? And again, nobody wants to go through COVID. I think one of the things that we can kind of hang our hat on is that we did make it work. And there is a way, when it's needed, there is a way that we can work with almost anybody in the world.
Well, so with all that groundwork laid, let's get into ASPR. And I was wondering if you could just give us a little bit of an overview, because I was reading that it was, until a couple of years ago, well, recently it was elevated to a so-called operating division within
Yeah.
HHS. It seems to have an umbrella over lots of things now. So, we profiled BARDA on previous shows. Carbex is in this portfolio. Obviously, we'll be talking about industrial base, the national stockpile, but give us sort of a top line overview of ASPR, where it sits, where you sit right now, and where you are right now as we're chatting, and a little bit of the history up into your current role of Director of Infectious Disease Preparedness and Response.
Yeah, sure. So ASPR, as you mentioned, started out as the staff division within the Department of Health and Human Services. What that means is we are part of the immediate office of the secretary. We are I don't think an administrative arm is quite the right way to describe it, but we are still kind of a support group within the immediate office of the secretary. Over time, our book of business grew, particularly with BARDA, with the SNS, in our response to hurricanes. There is a lot of work that we're doing that is more than being a support group within the immediate office. So there's been a long time discussion about whether we were most appropriately a staff division or an operating division. And just for context, an operating division, CDC, FDA, NIH, those are all operating divisions, where you have kind of a normal book of business, and it makes a little bit more sense for you to step out from under the umbrella of the Office of the Secretary and into a distinct place where you're an operating division. So that transition happened, I guess it's about a couple of years ago now. And that elevates our office to a little bit of a different thing. There's a lot of administration things that go on with that. Hiring authorities, some of the budget authorities, some of the ways we work changed. But really, I think more than anything, it was a recognition that ASPR has a lot of work that stands on its own and really is more closely matched to our colleagues over at CDC, NIH, FDA, rather than maybe a staff division within the Office of the Secretary. As far as how we've organized ourselves, we have 7 centers. We've mentioned a few of them already. The Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, BARDA, very well known. The Strategic National Stockpile, well known before COVID, even better known after COVID. And then we have our Center for Response, a Center for Preparedness, the Industrial Base Management and Supply Chain Group. We have a Center for Administration, just so that we can kind of keep all of our business going. And then our newest one is the HHS Coordination and Response Element, or HCORE. That was born out of Operation Warp Speed, that morphed into the Countermeasures Acceleration Group, and then became HCORE within ASPR. And that is the group that, within a large response, is doing a lot of the logistics associated with getting out the vaccines, therapeutics that BARDA is developing, SNS is stockpiling, and all of those things that make a response run more smoothly. And so that's how we've organized ourselves. Where I am in the immediate office of ASPR. I work directly with ASPR as an organization, obviously. It's also a person, the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response. Right now, that's Dawn O'Connell. So I work directly in her office. And again, I've got the most redundant title in the world, the Infectious Disease Preparedness and Response for the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response. But really, anytime there's infectious disease involved, use of medical countermeasures, I'm typically connected. So having gone through COVID, managed a few Ebola outbreaks, Marburg, Sudan were both in there, transitioned into Mpox. As part of my IBMSC work, I happened to be there during the fly formula operation, so involved in that. And then obviously right now with avian influenza. So it's kind of a snapshot of the history of ASPR, where I sit in it, and kind of how we're arranged.
And let's just dive into a couple of these components that we've not talked that much about. And as
Yeah.
mentioned again in the bio, you had this responsibility for industrial-based management, supply chain, and again, we'll put the links in the bio of the show, but one can go to the ASPR website and sort of take a look. And this is quite a broad spectrum of areas where you're expanding industrial base. So everything from
Yeah.
therapeutics, vaccines, testing capabilities, raw materials for all of the above, as well as PPE. And there's not just large companies in here. One was On Demand Pharma, I see, was in here, and we profiled
Mhm.
them a couple of years ago. But walk into how you work with industry, and not just the big companies, but the startups that maybe listening to the show and say, hey, I have something that might be a really cool piece of PPE for
Yeah.
Marburg, God forbid, in the future. But how does this industrial base portfolio network here work?
Yeah, that's another one that was born out of COVID. I mean, everybody remembers early days of COVID. Wasn't enough PPE. All of our PPE, that industry had moved out of the United States. We were sourcing PPE from primarily Asia. And when the whole world needed PPE, we were not first in line to get it. Obviously, that was not a good situation for us. So uh, in parallel with Operation Warp Speed, we had something called the Industrial Base Expansion effort. And that was kind of a whole of government effort. On the ASPR side, we worked quite a bit with DoD, obviously throughout COVID. In this particular area, we were working with the Air Force Contracting Group to build out the industrial base for PPE manufacturing. So, and it was for all phases, not just the final assembly of the gloves, but it is, building the NBR, the nitrobutadiene rubber, if I remember my acronym correctly. And then the key chemicals that go into that, acetonitrile. I will not remember those chemicals on the fly. But getting from soup to nuts, that capability here in the States, so that we are not in a pinch dependent upon foreign suppliers. So we've done that. We have successes in that. We have programs that didn't work quite as well as we have wanted. That is kind of common to development in everything we do. It's the shots on goals so that we do have success. So we are right now in that group. A big focus is right now to say, all right, we have built factories, we have built capacity so that we can do this. The demand right now is gone. We do not have the demand that we had during COVID, thankfully. So we're really transitioning into a phase of how do we keep these companies viable in the absence of that, huge demand that came with COVID. So that's I was over in IBMSC. I had the good fortune of helping to stand it up as it was built into an office at the time and now a center within ASPR. And then transition that over to a couple of people, Tim Belsky for a bit, and then Arlene Joyner, who's right now the Deputy Assistant Secretary in charge of IBMSC. She and her team are just doing fantastic work on that point, trying to understand how these companies can be viable, how they can be competitive, and it is not a level playing field. Our foreign competition, there is government money that goes in to subsidize these. Obviously, worker costs outside the US are not the same as they are here in the US. And I don't think we want to match what others are doing. So given that we don't want to match that, how do we then keep cost of goods to a point where we can still be competitive? She's doing a great job with those performers that were successful in standing up manufacturing capacity, getting them linked up, finding demand, and seeing how we can keep these places viable. So that if we are in a situation again in the future where PPE is at a premium, we've got that manufacturing capacity ready to go. They also do a lot of other things that you kind of touched on there. Vaccine manufacturing, the raw materials, the vials, the stoppers, needles, syringes, all of these things that go into that, those are industries that have largely left the US. So bringing some of those back, onshoring, friendshoring, sometimes we'll say, where we are closer with some of the other countries and sharing this load is a big focus for them too. So again, if we are in a pinch, if we are having trouble sourcing these types of things. We want to be as self-sufficient as we possibly can in the future, so that we don't run into those supply chain issues. That's really the focus. She's doing a lot of great work. And you mentioned you're going to post the link. I think everybody should take a look at that. It's really a great thing. They also do an annual industry day where companies who might be interested in partnering with us can come in, listen to their priorities, listen to what they think they're going to be investing in, but also grab people and have some one-on-one conversations, talk about some of the products that maybe we don't know about, and maybe we might want to invest in if we knew about them. So all those opportunities, I think that's the undercurrent of everything that we do is like that. A lot of that outreach and connections to the places where we don't quite know everything that's going on. So having companies, people with ideas for things, really encourage them. Come on into us, look at the websites. There's points of contact, there's lines in. So definitely let us know. This is a big thing that we do.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. And, along those lines, again, ASPR oversees our strategic national stockpile, and this is, we have something I think I read something like 12 of these locations. They're secret, so yeah, as you can't tell us where they are. But in looking at the pictures of them on the website, clearly there's a lot of stuff there. I was wondering if you could just give us a little overview of what the Strategic National Stockpile is, and I was reading this cool thing about these 50-ton push packs that you have that are meant to get out there quickly, could handle a 3-city incidents that could be made up of smallpox and anthrax and also to other nasty things that happen at once. Whatever you can tell us here, I think that'd be cool. But whatever you can't tell us, that's cool also.
Totally fine. I can tell you quite a bit, actually.
All right.
What you mentioned about the push packs, that really is the historical function of the SNS. When we're talking about things like anthrax, smallpox, the nasty stuff, whether it's an accidental release, whether it's an intentional release, we need to be able to push a lot of stuff to probably a few locations. You mentioned it was built around 3. That is, if the day ever hits, which hopefully never does, where there's an intentional release, it could happen in multiple locations. We want to be able to get product out there quickly. It is in massive push packs quite often, and that is the historical model. We would push these push packs out, and then they would go through secondary distribution to get to the points of need as quickly as possible. That's the historical model. We have seen, and I think Mpox was the best example of this. We have medical countermeasures that we developed for smallpox. Vaccines, therapeutics, TPOXX, brincidofovir are both kind of common now. People know those. I can tell you, we all worked on those, and it was very quiet. I could not have ever predicted that those products would come into the spotlight the way they did during Mpox. And what we saw during Mpox was after COVID, where ease of vaccine was a priority for us, to make sure that we were, equitable, accessible. That was the model. We were getting more vaccine than we would need because we wanted it everywhere it could possibly be to make it as easy on people to get vaccinated as possible, which is a great thing. I think that has changed where the bar is on the provision of medical countermeasures from the US government. And so this model of massive push packs that go to 1 or 2 or 3 locations, and then it's on the people who receive them to figure out how to get them through that last mile. I think more and more that's coming over to us. And it's something where we really want to the extent we possibly can, take that burden off of our state, territorial, tribal, local officials, and then do some of that distribution for them. So you've seen in the Mpox response, we did a lot of pre-positioning of TPOXX so that it is in the field in a lot of different places. If people were eligible for treatment with TPOXX, it's an investigational therapeutic. They were able to source that quickly. It wasn't in these, selected warehouses, and it wasn't going to take a day, 2, 3 to reach the patient. They were very close to where the patients were. That was a model that we really took during COVID and then brought it over to Mpox. Same with the Jynneos vaccine. People want to get vaccinated. It is tough. It's annoying for some people to travel long distances to get vaccine. It's impossible for others, and that's just something we just can't have. It can't be a barrier to vaccine. Distance can't be a barrier to vaccination. So that's one thing that we're really trying to work with in modernizing the SNS, modernizing the way that ASPR does distribution, and really kind of focusing in on that last mile. As far as the products that are in the SNS, it's a little bit of a Rorschach test when you ask people. Often what people might think is in there sometimes might not be, because we are, it is a resource issue. There are things that I would like to have there, and there just aren't the resources. So we're constantly fighting for additional resources so that we can have the things that we think we need there. But it has broadened quite a bit, where it might have been, these worst day type of countermeasures, smallpox, anthrax, bot, that type of thing. It's really broadened out quite a bit. Personal protective equipment is in the stockpile. Gloves, goggles, face masks, respirators, all types of things there because of COVID, and because they were needed, again, because of the PPE concerns that we were talking about. We see value right now in what we're doing with avian influenza. We're making that PPE available. Goggles, gloves, again, the N95 masks to dairy workers right now. Not something we would have predicted, but great that we have that asset in the SNS so that we can be flexible and just do whatever we can to help the public anytime we have a threat to our health.
Segues very nicely into my next topic. And of course, a couple of weeks ago, you and another awesome group of folks published in CDC Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza H5N1 viruses in the U.S. dairy cattle and detection of human cases. Again, take your time with this. Obviously, what you could talk about, great. What you can't talk about, that's also great, understood. Clearly, this is probably one that's on your desk right now as important. And I guess from a beneficial angle, we don't have a tremendous amount of human cases, but we do have millions of animals dying. And, we do, as a society, consume, billions of pounds of meat and milk and all sorts of other stuff. And, this is clearly one that straddles human health, animal health. Once again, this One Health concept. What's going on in your office with regard to H5N1? Whatever you can talk about, please give us the lay of the land and June.
It's a lot. And I actually can talk about most of the things we're working on, pretty much all of them, actually. And you hit it. This is a One Health thing. It is in animals primarily right now. We have had 3 cases. Most recently, I think just last week, the 3rd case was identified in Michigan, where the first 2 were limited to conjunctivitis, pink eye. So very mild, right? This most recent case did have respiratory symptoms, a cough, no fever. So still a very, very mild presentation, but concerning, right? And even before these human cases, it's concerning anytime that we see H5N1 or any avian influenza in a new mammalian species. We were concerned about it when we saw it in minks, in Europe, seals here. There was a dolphin identified. Anytime we're seeing this in mammals, there's potential for mammalian adaptation. We obviously are mammals, and we do not want to see that. When we saw it in cows, I think it's a step up, right? We don't spend a lot of time with seals and dolphins, maybe unfortunately, but we do spend a lot of times with cows. They're part of our food supply, milk, beef. Our workers are in close proximity, so that when we have this virus percolating in cows, it is always a chance that it's going to have adaptations to make it more transmissible in mammalians, and potentially could have adaptations to make it more transmissible in humans. So we've been saying a cause for alert, not a reason to stay alert, but not a cause for alarm. And that's really where we are right now. CDC, USDA are doing great work to try to get a handle on this, understand the universe of the infection that's out there. Over at ASPR, we're very much preparedness on one front, response on another. And I'll start with the response. Again, it's the PPE. We've got it. It can be helpful. So we've been out there making sure that our public health partners are linked up correctly with their agricultural counterparts, so that if there is a need out there that can't be, you can buy goggles, you can buy gloves, right? It might not be possible all the time. A lot of our states have PPE stockpiles that they can provide to help out our dairy workers and our poultry workers. But they might need a little bit of help from the SNS. So we've been making sure that everybody knows that we're a resource. We've sent out PPE to 6 states so far. We've had a few orders for gloves, a few orders for N95 masks. The common thing in all of the orders is goggles. And I think that goes with what we're seeing. And it's great that we're able to step in and help out where we can there. So that's PPE. Antivirals, the fortunate thing about influenza, it's not COVID, right? It's not a new virus that has snuck up on us. It's influenza. It's different from our seasonal influenza, but it is still influenza. And we do have some tools, on day one that we can use. Most notably are the antivirals. I mentioned adaptation of the virus, evolution of the virus. We are not seeing, fortunately, any of the genetic markers associated with resistance to the antivirals that we have. So we have Tamiflu, generic name is oseltamivir. We have peramivir, zanamivir, baloxavir, which is Xofluza. We're not seeing resistance markers to any of those. So we imagine they'll be on the table available for treatment if we do get more cases. Where there are cases right now in Michigan, we are reaching out to see if they need Tamiflu from the SNS. Again, it's available on the commercial market. Tamiflu is the most commonly prescribed influenza antiviral. There's no shortages, but we're here with a lot of courses in the Strategic National Stockpile if we need those. Make sure everybody's available. I'm sure. Making sure everybody's aware that they can come to us if they need those. So that's the response aspect. The preparedness is really about vaccines. So you've heard recently the risk to humans right now is low from CDC. Our job at ASPR is to be prepared if that shifts. So we manage, and particularly BARDA, manages a program called the National Pre-Pandemic Influenza Vaccine Stockpile Program, or the NPIVS, which is a mouthful. And what we do under that, this is the great thing. We are working on these things when the spotlight is not there. So we are constantly working with CDC, WHO, taking a look at circulating strains of influenza. Anytime we see something that's a little bit different, we make what we call a candidate vaccine virus. CDC does that. And this allows us, this is kind of the seed to manufacture the antigen component of a vaccine should we ever need a vaccine. So we have been tracking this clade of H5N1 for quite a while. It's been in wild birds for a few years now. Obviously in the minks, some of the mammalian species, now cows. When we look at this virus, it's largely unchanged. So the candidate vaccine virus that we had ready because we saw this kind of, bubbling up in birds is actually still a good match to the virus that we're seeing in cows, to the virus that we've seen in 3 humans so far. What that means is we're kind of primed and ready to go if we need to manufacture vaccine. We've got this candidate vaccine virus. We can make the antigen. That antigen is cross-reactive against this H5N1. That gives us good indication that we'll be able to make a vaccine that hopefully prevents infection. Most likely, and I can say this with a little bit of confidence, will prevent severe illness associated with H5N1. So in addition to that, we keep going on the preparedness aspect in the absence of any clear risk or clear need for vaccine. And we work with the 3 companies that produce the seasonal influenza vaccine. And during their off time, when they're not manufacturing that fall vaccine, we work with them to do initial manufacturing of these antigens against these viruses that we're watching. And so about a year and a half ago, we made a small lot of antigen. This antigen that I mentioned is cross-reactive against the current H5N1. We put that into a clinical trial. We're supporting those clinical trials. They're looking at safety and immunogenicity. Those are ongoing. And what this means is that right now we have an initial supply of pre-filled syringes. These are kind of left over from the manufacturing of vaccine that was used in the clinical trial. We also have bulk antigen. This is the antigen in the big bags that we can fill into final vials if we need to. As part of our preparedness efforts, again, don't need a vaccine right now, but want to have the flexibility. We've taken about, it's 4.8 million dose equivalents of antigen, mixing that with the adjuvant that we also stockpile under the MPIVS, and we're putting those into final container. Those will be ready later this summer. And we'll have, between 4.5, 5 million doses available for use if we need to. Doing all of that, again, right now, vaccination isn't part of the response. If that changes, though, want to be ready with some of those if we need them. So that's really what we're doing. That's the ASPR book of business. I can tell you one thing that kind of has come with us since we were a staff division in HHS. Part of our responsibilities were to coordinate responses for the secretary. We have carried that through, even though we're an operating division right now. So we do have a coordinating role. We work closely with our colleagues at CDC, NIH, FDA, HRSA, a lot of groups within HHS to make sure that we're coordinating all of the work that we're doing on avian influenza. So we're carrying that role as well. But that's really what's going on here at ASPR these days.
The silly question, but do you get involved because of the sort of the One Health nature of all this stuff, but especially in this case, do you get involved at ASPR at all in the animal vaccination side, or is that sort of USDA's and other agencies' responsibilities? And I'm just thinking from the perspective of this one story that Lin Fa Wang down in Singapore told a couple of years ago on a show where, about Hendra, which, the strategy was to, vaccinate all the horses, and then, the little leap doesn't happen. Obviously, we got a lot more cows and chickens and stuff like that. But do these things show up on your radar, or is that a separate agency?
That one's really squarely on USDA. I think there's other groups involved in that because there's trade impacts, right? If we're vaccinating, all of those things are considered. Where we could lend support potentially, we obviously have a lot of experience in developing vaccines, sometimes rapidly when needed, and understanding not just the technical aspects, but also the economic aspects of it and how we can work with companies. So that's an expertise that we'd make available to our USDA colleagues if they wanted it. But really that line of effort is squarely within USDA.
So, yeah. Moving on to sort of the future here, again, there's the bipartisan Commission on Biodefense, which was, started several years ago to sort of look at this major assessment of our United States efforts in biodefense, and have had the honor to profile everyone from Congresswoman Donna Shalala, former head of FDA Peggy Hamburg, the late Senator Joe Lieberman. Everyone's clearly on whatever side of the aisle you're on, they're all concerned about where we're going with this as a country. The plan for the Athena project, as it was called, was $100 billion, across many different disciplines that we've been discussing here today. Dave, would just love to hear, your perspective on, what you would love to see. Clearly, there's not infinity dollars, but nonetheless, we are in an era of moonshots where we do make things happen at a large scale. What do you want to see in the coming years in terms of where we go, what type of resources we bring to this biodefense equation, as you are clearly sitting in the middle of all of it from
Yeah.
all angles.
Yeah, I can tell you, I think what I don't want to see is COVID fatigue lasting. We can't fall into that trap. We've done it quite a bit, right? We did it with Ebola. We're doing it with COVID, and it's understandable. It was a lot, and it was taxing on a lot of people and really wore people down. So I completely understand it, and I'm in it with them. But I do think we have friends everywhere. You mentioned on both sides of the aisle, whether it's biodefense, whether it's public health. Everybody has an interest here, and there are, it's not a hypothetical anymore. When we argued for funding, when we argued about the importance of R&D, preparedness, that type of thing, it used to be a hypothetical argument that if we did have something that uh, really had a significant negative impact on the country, shutting things down, affecting certain industries, you know, just compromising our ability to function, what the economic impact of that would be. And it was hypothetical up until a few years ago. It's not hypothetical anymore. It's out there. I think there's a good argument that a dollar spent for preparedness is could ultimately save a lot of money if some of these things come to fruition. So I'd want people to not forget about that. I'd also want people to not forget about what we've been able to do when resourced. We saw with COVID. I remember, one of the things I mentioned an Ebola working group that we had. We early in COVID, and this is in January, so this is really early. We just pulled that group together and said, hey, we might not all be the respiratory people, but go grab your respiratory people. Let's get together. Let's figure out what we're going to do here. Let's talk about therapeutics. Let's talk about what's out there, the repurposing, developing new things. Let's talk about vaccines. It was a different group than this one. But people were talking about vaccines. What do we do? How do we do it? How can we do it faster? How can we take this sequential model of preclinical, clinical, manufacturing? How can we layer those on top of each other so that we're compressing timelines? It's resource dependent. The risk tolerance, you've got to not be averse to financial losses when things don't work out. So it does take resources. But I would like for people to make sure that they remember what we were able to do in COVID on short timelines. We had, and I don't remember the exact times, but we had the first therapeutic out there with the first vaccine within 10, 11 months. And these are things that, you ask anybody what the timeline is on a new vaccine, they're going to probably tell you 10, 15 years or something like that. But we were able to do it a lot faster. And we were able to, have a significant number of doses once it did reach regulatory approval by stacking that manufacturing and taking some risk there. So I think it's important for everybody to understand what can be done. And I'll say that also acknowledging that there's probably a lot of things that can be done in this country. And again, it's not infinite resources. We've got to figure out where we're going to spend them. I would imagine if you go to Department of Transportation, they could tell you, "Hey, I've got a plan to fix every pothole in the country." It just takes some resources. I honestly can say that with regard to development of medical countermeasures, public health preparedness, we've got a plan. I think there is a way that we can build defenses for the things that we know. I think there's ways that we can build infrastructure that could rapidly pivot to catch the things that we don't know. Again, it does take resources. I hope people don't forget about this. I hope they don't forget about the impact that COVID had on us, because there are other threats out there. We're seeing it right now with avian influenza. I hope that this doesn't become anything, but there's always that potential. And I just think it's really critical. We've got a lot of people left in government who have survived the last 5 years because they're dedicated to the mission and because they want to do these things. So I just hope as a nation we don't forget that, and we do find the resources that can be put to this. We put to them. We continue to do the good work. That's my hope.
Awesome. I'm sitting here in downtown Center City, Philadelphia. A couple blocks away is the Pennsylvania Convention Center. And I think in a couple months, the World Antimicrobial Resistance Congress is going to be there. I think you're going to be there, talking about a variety of cool things. Um, we don't have to get into AMR because that's something we've been doing a lot on some different shows, but would love to hear just a little bit about what's coming up for you. Obviously, the AMR Congress, very important, a pandemic that's here, unfortunately,
Yeah.
under sort of different guises. But what else is coming up for you for the rest of the year in terms of either conferences or talks or other public-facing initiatives that we should know about as we wrap up the show?
Yeah, so there is that one. There are a few. I will be honest, I don't keep a great track. I've got somebody who kind of keeps me on point and tells me where I need to be. But I can tell you, like right now, we're doing a ton of stakeholder work. So every year, I'm sorry, every week right now, we're meeting with farm worker organizations, just to let them know. And I do this with CDC, FDA, NIH, USDA, just let them know everything that we've got going on, let them know the resources that are available to them. We're doing that. I think that's the critical one. We're also doing this with our colleagues on the Hill, our governors, our state, territorial, local, tribal public health officials. So there is a lot of we're doing press every week, obviously. So there's a lot of external engagement. I would imagine there's going to be some conferences in my future, but the one you named is the one I've got on my radar. Could be others though, and always happy to I think also what I'd say to that is the conferences. Those are fine. I think when groups have interest in what we're doing, just reach out. I think we're a group that, because of what we've done historically, the biodefense thing, we're a little bit quiet, we're a little bit under the radar. More and more, I think we have increasing relevance to public health and things that are happening every day. So I would say to anybody who catches this, if you don't know what ASPR is all about, if you'd like to learn more, just find a way, reach out to us. Love to sit down and talk more with anybody who's interested.
Really awesome. And as my daughter's school is right around the corner from the convention, I'm going to bring her by and see you in September because she's really
Sounds
into
good.
biology. So got to come
I,
by.
I, I'll be looking. Yeah, that sounds great.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, really amazing work, Dave. I just so appreciate what you've been doing again to keep us safe and that you continue and wishing you and your team the best as you continue to work on all these different fronts under the ASPR umbrella. But just really, really impressive work. Again, for everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the podcast networks or who will be watching on our YouTube channel. Again, you've been spending time with Dr. David Boucher, Director, Infectious Disease Preparedness and Response, Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response within the United States Department of Health and Human Services. David, again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while. Thank you for what you do for all of us to keep the country safe. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better and safer tomorrow for everybody via what you do. Really a great story, and it's so great being able to profile you.
Ira, thank you, and thank you for what you're doing. It's been wonderful to come on and talk to you. Just really appreciate this. Thanks.
Great seeing you.